Hi everyone, it's Sonia here. I've been super busy the last few days trying to catch my son up with his schoolwork, but I've got like a big COVID related info dump that I want to do. A lot of interesting information coming out about the WHO, about what Canada's up to straight from their site. Are they planning to hire a third party to build COVID detention facilities? Also, a very interesting study from the CDC concerning masks, and a very interesting study from Brazil concerning COVID-associated ICU hospitalization and mortality in the different blood groups, ABO and Rh positive versus Rh negative. So I guess you guys know I'm going to kind of nerd out here. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, stick with me because you're probably going to like this. Also, before I start, I just want to let you know I still have available these pouches from purifierpouch.com, which eliminate odors by removing viruses, bacteria, fungus, and mold. And I just want to give you one example of something that I did with one of these. Okay, this is kind of TMI maybe, but some of you might relate to this. We have a dog, the dog's old, he peed on a sheepskin. Now normally if that happened, you'd pretty much figure the sheepskin was done. But what I did was I put the sheepskin in a bag with one of these pouches overnight, and it really got rid of the odor so much that all I had to do after that was wash it in cold water with laundry soap, and the sheepskin was saved. So yeah, these things are pretty powerful, and they're still 15% off for a 3-pack of pouches, even if you live in Canada. So if you're interested, please click the link below for more info, and also through the link you'll see there also are water purification tabs available. Okay, so let's do the info dump. You might have heard this already, but I just want to let you know in case you haven't heard. The WHO now condemns lockdowns and says they only make poor people poorer. So basically the WHO has now reversed their stance. Originally they were saying that countries should go on lockdown. Now they're saying that they would rather avoid that, and it's really only something you should do to regroup and to strategize and to figure out what your next move is, but it shouldn't be your end strategy for how to deal with COVID-19. And what's his name? David Nabarro from the WHO said, lockdowns just have one consequence that you must never ever belittle, and that is making poor people an awful lot poorer. So at this point they recognize the ripple effects of the lockdowns, and they're actually saying that child malnutrition rates could double because of this. So like a lot of people could die from the effects of the poverty that will come out of the lockdown. So now they're saying that that is not their strategy of choice. So heads up. Okay, local news. Francois Legault says he's given the green light for Halloween. Because, you know, you don't want to traumatize the kids, right? I mean, that would be pretty extreme if the kids can't go out and get candy. So he's saying you have the green light, but you're not allowed to have people in your house, you're not allowed to have parties. And when you go trick-or-treating, you have to stay 6 feet away. So what are they going to do? You know, throw the candy at the kids? Hey, attrape mon petit gars. Or there was somebody had actually like made a chute à bonbons. It was like a metal tube from the second floor. So the kids just go down there with their little pumpkins and candy comes flying down the chute. He was suggesting that you put the candy in bags in a basket, and that the little ones come and just pick up a bag, and like nobody touches anybody. Anyhow, that's it. Halloween is still a go. Okay, so here's a study that I find very interesting. This is from cdc.gov. Listen up, YouTube. I'm not making this stuff up. Community and close contact exposures associated with COVID-19 among symptomatic adults over 18 years in 11 outpatient healthcare facilities. So this is from the US. This is from July. So the reason I wanted to bring this up was that there is a little part here where they talk about masks, characteristics of symptomatic adults over 18 who are outpatient, who receive positive and negative SARS-CoV-2 tests. So what's going around on Facebook is like a little close-up of one part of this table, which shows that reported use of cloth face mask covering or mask 14 days before illness onset never is only 3.9%, rarely 3.9%, sometimes 7.2%, often 14.4%, and always, meaning these people always wore masks is 70.6%. So what people did was they interpreted this to mean, aha, you see, the people who always wear masks are more likely to get sick. But I have to point out that is not the way to interpret this graph at all. Now, all the people in that category are the case patients, the ones who have COVID. But you have to look at the other column, control participants. They have roughly the same number. And you have to look at what were their mask wearing habits. So what you should be noticing here is that the numbers are very similar in the two columns, except that in the ones who didn't have it, they wore masks a little bit more. However, if you look at this p-value here, probability value, you'll see that what it means here, this number, it means it's not statistically significant. So basically what's happening here is that everybody's wearing masks most of the time. Most people are wearing them often or always. Most people across the board, whether they got it or they didn't get it, they're wearing masks. So people didn't get sick because they weren't wearing masks, because they were wearing them. The study found that the greatest risk factor for getting COVID was having close contact with someone who has it, in particular a family member. So surprise, they figured out that if you live with a sick person, you're more likely to get sick even if you wear a mask in public. So they were recommending that people now wear masks in their homes. Yeah. As far as risk factors in public go, the one thing that they did find was that going to restaurants was associated with an increased risk of getting COVID, which really sucks because, you know, a lot of restaurants have really suffered from this and have been closing. So that's really bad news. What about going to the gym? Nothing else really, no. You know, they found that eating in restaurants, that was probably the most strongly associated. So they couldn't even say like, oh look, all the people who got it weren't wearing masks, because they were. I want to talk to you about this video which somebody brought to my attention, isolation/internment camps in Canada. Isolation internment camps. So this is from a YouTuber called What's Her Face. And she's showing a couple of documents that are showing that the government of Canada, was ordering request for proposal riot control agent. They were ordering all this tear gas, published this request in September, and where was the date? Yes, to be delivered to Canadian Forces Ammunition Depot, Dundurn, Saskatchewan by March 31st, 2021. Okay, so this YouTuber was interpreting this like, oh look, they're buying all this tear gas because they're getting ready for something, and it's going to be something that's going to come in March. So don't think this is going to be over anytime soon, because they're obviously preparing for something. However, you got to really read the whole thing. I'm not saying I know what the government's up to, right? But let's just look at what this actually says. It says the riot control agent is required for training purposes only. It is required to train Canadian Armed Forces personnel in the use of the respirator against basic chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense. So the tear gas is for them to use on their own soldiers to train them for how to use respirators. That's what they say. And they say DND has been using this agent for over 30 years. This is a regular replenishment and should provide stock for approximately 5 to 7 years. So I could not take this as proof that the government is gearing up for massive riots and pepper spraying everybody, because they're saying here that this is something they do regularly and that they stock up every 5 to 7 years. So pretty much that's what I found. The other thing was service providers for federal quarantine or isolation sites. So the government of Canada on buyandsell.gc.ca, they put up these tender notices, letters of interest, requests for information. When they're like soliciting a product or service, they're saying, hey, we need this or we need that, and then people can put bids in. And this is probably actually closed right now, because as of when I opened it, it said days until closing, 1 hour, 1 minute. So it was published September 17th. Amendment date October 19th, closing October 19th at 2 p.m. Yeah, so it closed about an hour ago. Region of delivery, all the provinces. Procurement entity, Public Works and Government Services Canada. So here's what it is. It says the Government of Canada is considering engaging a third-party service provider for federal quarantine/isolation sites that will be used to house and care for people for public health and other related federal requirements associated with the COVID-19 pandemic response. Personally, I couldn't really quite understand that sentence. I found that it was very vague. To house and care for people for public health and other related federal requirements associated with the COVID-19 pandemic response. Yeah, that's kind of pretty open-ended, I think. They didn't exactly say what they're going to do, but you tell me what you think it means. The government is seeking feedback from current service providers about potential options for standing up, operating, and managing all of the services associated with these sites. So it's like they're planning to set up quarantine sites according to this. At this time, this document here really is a notice that they want to engage third-party services, as in it's not going to be the government themselves building these sites or administrating them, running them. The government is seeking feedback from current service providers about potential options for standing up, operating, and managing all the services associated with these sites. The purpose of this request for information is to seek feedback from potential service providers in order to develop a strategy for the potential future management of these sites going forward. So, yeah, it says this is not a bid solicitation. So whether or not potential suppliers respond, I mean, it's really like preliminary, but when was this put up? This was published September 17th, amended October 19th. That's today. So the government just recently published this site. I mean, this, what do they call this? A notice here? Tender notice saying that they're considering hiring third-party service providers for these quarantine facilities, which is kind of weird because actually I wanted to point out, some people seem to think that like whether you're in lockdown or not, or how strict things are, has to do directly with how many cases you have, but I don't think it does, because I was just talking to someone who's in Nova Scotia and he said they actually have only like 4 cases. They're all from people who came in by travel. They have not had any community spread at all. The Maritimes had created a COVID bubble. Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and PEI, I think, and Newfoundland and Labrador, or something like that. Like there was this bubble, right? So I was under the impression, well, it's like they have no COVID, so maybe their life is kind of going on as normal and they can travel freely around those maritime areas, but apparently not. From what this guy was telling me, even though they have no community spread, they have like nothing. 4 people come in, they go into quarantine upon arrival, turns out they have COVID, they stay isolated, and that's it. And yet they still have all the distancing, things being closed, the masks, the restrictions on gatherings. Like they're pretty much living exactly like we are here in Montreal, where we have a whole lot of COVID. So I wouldn't count on low numbers, meaning that, you're out of the woods, if you know what I mean. So yeah, and we don't really have like a whole lot. I don't know what the government is thinking. I mean, yes, we have a bit here in Quebec, but it's not like it was in the spring. It's mostly young people. We're not having a lot of hospitalizations. That's what they're saying here. It's manageable, and the deaths are a lot lower than they were before, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes, but I don't know. What's the government up to? You let me know what you think, okay? So the thing was, people were especially worried because this is from the Post-Millennial. Quebec may detain citizens at COVID-19 isolation facilities. So this YouTuber, what's her face is her name, she was saying, well, look, they've already started detaining people in Quebec. Now, I live in Quebec, and it's not like they're coming and grabbing tons of people. That's not the strategy they're using. What happened was, this was what, a month or 2 ago, September 9th. So almost 2 months ago. Dr. Jacques Girard, the leader of the Quebec City Public Health Authority, he said they had detained somebody who refused to self-isolate, led them to being taken and forcibly placed in isolation by the state in an undisclosed location. You can see video here of Dr. Girard telling you this. It's not something that's made up in, you know, a 4chan forum. So this happened in Quebec City, that they detained someone. It was kind of a big deal. It was all over the news. To the best of my knowledge, they haven't done this to anyone else. However, Quebec has made penalties more strict. Like it says here in this article, what they're doing is they're imposing fines, $400 to $6,000 dollars. As of, this article was from 22nd of September, and it was like near the end of the month. It went from that if someone wasn't wearing a mask, the store owner would be responsible and could be fined, to now if people aren't wearing masks or they're not following distancing, they can be fined. And if you have people in your house that aren't supposed to be there, the police can come over pretty quickly. They set up like this express system so they can get warrants right away to go into your house, and they can fine people. Now for travelers, it's really, really strict. They have, I think it's been reduced to 10 days of isolation, but the penalties if they break that are very severe. It's a $750,000 fine or up to a year in jail. But anyway, this is the approach that's been being taken right now. They don't have any like specific COVID detention facilities where they're putting a lot of people. And if people break the orders that were in under lockdown, like being in a red zone, it's mostly fines that people get. So yeah, as for what's her face's video, I mean, right now, no, we don't have this going on in Quebec. Is the government setting up for camps? I mean, I don't know. Like, it's concerning. You guys let me know what you think. Oh wait, there was one more thing I want to tell you about since we're talking about Quebec. Profiles of COVID-19 patients have changed at the Jewish General Hospital. This is an English COVID hospital here in Montreal. And they're saying there's virtually no one coming from the nursing homes. I know why that is, because I am a sneaky snoop and I find things out. This is from our government distribution of number of daily deaths related to COVID. Okay, we are here now. I want you to look at where the deaths are occurring. Okay, you see where it says CHSLD, that's public retirement homes. RPA is private. You see, there are deaths happening in the retirement homes. Actually, most of the deaths. See that? Some home and unknown, but a lot of them are happening in the retirement homes, both public and private. Okay? I just want you to see that this is a pattern. At least as many, and actually more deaths are still happening in the retirement homes. Yeah, in the newspaper, it's reported there's virtually no one coming from the nursing homes. No one's coming from the nursing homes to be admitted to the hospital, and yet, when you look at the graph here, you see that they're having plenty of deaths in the nursing homes. So we know that they're having cases. So how is it possible this is happening? And at the same time, this is what the doctors are observing. I was looking on the statistics. Our government is really transparent here. Like, you can find out exactly how many people died each day, how many people were in hospital, the age of the people in hospital, age of the people in ICU, age of the people who died. You can find out where they came from, whether it was at home or public nursing home, private, intermediate residence, whatever. Like, it's all there. So I was perusing these things, being the nerd that I am, and I noticed that the deaths are still in people who are 90 and 80, you know, and above, right? Above 80 and 90, somewhat in 70, been a couple in the 60s, but it's mostly still people way up, you know, in those age groups. And then I was thinking, well, there must be a lot of people in that age group in the hospitals, right? If they're all dying. I mean, isn't that what you do with sick people? You take them to the hospital, and if they're really sick, you put them in the ICU, and then maybe that doesn't work and they die. So I looked at the stats for the hospitals and ICU, and I was very surprised to see that there's very, very few people in their 80s and 90s in the hospital in the ICU compared to, you know, the number of people that are dying. Like, there weren't even enough people in the hospital to account for the people who had died in their 90s in September, for example. So I was like, wait, those people couldn't have been in the hospital because there's no, like, they're not accounted for in the hospital. So, like, what's going on? So I was at my mother's retirement home, and I started talking to this guy about it. Turns out this guy is an ambulance driver, and he tells me, we don't take them to the hospital. Mystery solved. So why are so many seniors in their 80s and 90s dying, and yet it's not accounted for in the hospital statistics? It's because the people in the public nursing homes, I don't know about the private ones, the public nursing homes, they don't take them to the hospital. For me, that kind of explains, well, why they die. I mean, yes, they're old and all that, but they're not even taken to the hospital. The guy said, the ambulance driver said, oh, we just treat them here. Well, what can you do in a CHSLD? They don't give IVs. So a lot of people, we learned from the last wave, they had died not just from COVID, but from dehydration because they were too weak to drink. No one was able to give them enough to drink because they were understaffed, and they don't give IVs. So if they don't give IVs and they're just kind of leaving old people in their beds in the CHSLDs, they're not bringing them to the hospitals, then, like, now you know where the people are dying. Not all of them. There are people coming from home, they're going to the hospital, dying in the hospital. But a lot of the really older seniors, they're still dying in the CHSLDs and the private homes, and they're not being brought to the hospital. So they're a mystery solved. See, in the first wave, the most hospitalized patients were in their 80s. The Jewish General is now treating patients in their 50s and 60s, in addition to the cohort of older individuals. Yeah, well, there are less people in the hospital. Proportionately, more of them are younger. But, you know, what's missing is those extra seniors who are just being, like, they're just being left in the CHSLDs. Anyway, that's what I was told from the ambulance driver. And, like, the stats are right there. You can see that that's what it adds up to. So I'm not sure what their strategy is with that. Okay, so here's the last thing I want to share with you. The effects of ABO and RH blood group antigens on admission to intensive care unit and mortality in patients with COVID-19 infection. Super interesting. This is from a Brazilian medical journal called Cielo. Well, no, it's on Cielo's the site. Revista de Associação Médica Brasileira. Okay, so the journal of the Brazilian Medical Association. A lot of people have been wondering whether certain blood groups are more susceptible than others to having severe COVID-19 infection and complications and death. There had been some studies looking at A, B, and O groups, and they said it seemed like O people were a little more protected, but it was nothing like really dramatic. It was just slight. But lots of people were wondering, what about RH factor? You know, I'm RH negative, so I'm a bit in with the RH negative nerds out there, you know. And so I'll tell you, people were seriously wondering, is anybody going to look at RH as a factor? And amazingly, this study from Brazil did that. I'll read to you what they say here. We evaluated 397 patients who were follow-up and treated due to COVID-19 infections. So they looked at age, gender, chronic disease, ABO and RH blood group antigens, admission rates to ICU, and mortality of the patients were analyzed. So here's what they found. If you look at this table, you'll see, first of all, there were a lot less people with RH negative admitted to the hospital than people with RH positive, which kind of isn't surprising because RH negative is less common. Here's a chart for distributions of blood types among different kinds of people. That said, if you look at the percent of ICU admission for all the RH positive blood groups, it's roughly the same. It's roughly at 15%, except for AB positive, which was at 9.5. And for mortality, the rates range from 4.8 to 8.5%. However, for all the blood groups that are RH negative, there were 0 ICU admissions and 0 mortality. Now, they had very few RH negative people, but if 15% were the average rate of ICU admission for RH positives, if it had been the same for the RH negatives, they should have at least had about 3 people in the ICU. They stated that neither mortality nor admission to ICU was seen for the RH negative group. We can state that patients with A blood group might be at higher risk for COVID-19 infection, which I think was the same in another study as well. And Rh positive patients might show poor outcomes as they were at higher risk for ICU admission. Their conclusion was that a specific blood group might face more risk of COVID-19 infection. More need for ICU admission is seen in Rh positive COVID-19 patients. Although statistically insignificant, all cases in which the outcome was death were found in the Rh positive group. And the reason it's statistically insignificant was because there were so very few Rh negative patients to begin with. Our study has some limitations. It was conducted in a single center and has a relatively small number of patients. They recommend that more studies be done on this. So it's not really enough to say, oh yes, look at this, all people with Rh negative blood, they're safe, they're not going to go to ICU, they're not going to die. So very, very small sample, but I think they should do more studies on this because this is kind of really interesting, don't you think? So anyhow, I think that's pretty much it. That's my COVID info dump. Thank you for joining me and nerding out with me. Thanks for joining me in the chat. Don't forget to check out the link if you're interested and the odor eliminating pouches. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. And God bless you guys. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.